If you were told as a child that you'd die in dark water, would you spend your life avoiding it? Or would the fear itself become inescapable? Natalie Wood didn't just become a star. She was raised inside the machinery that makes stars. Alongside the auditions and camera flashes, there was a warning her mother never forgot. Beware of dark water. She carried it like a shadow for 43 years. 3 Oscar nominations followed, films that defined an era, a face that symbolized Hollywood itself. And yet, she avoided deep water. Then, on a cold night in 1981, she vanished from a yacht near Catalina, only to be found the next morning in the Pacific. What happened that Thanksgiving weekend remains one of Hollywood's most haunting mysteries. Arguments, alcohol, a missing dinghy, and hours of silence before anyone called for help. This is the story of a star who had everything and a warning that refused to let go. She was born Natalia Nikolaevna Zakharenko on July 20th, 1938, in San Francisco. Her parents were Russian immigrants, and her mother, Maria Gurdin, had ambitions that far outpaced the family's modest circumstances. Maria believed her daughter was destined for greatness, and she clung to a fortune teller's warning as proof that fame and danger had already been written into the story. The child would be a great beauty, famous throughout the world. But there was a second part to the prediction, one that came with a warning. Beware of dark water. Maria took the promise of fame seriously and pushed hard. Wood began acting as a small child, and by 8, she was starring in Miracle on 34th Street, the kind of role that locks a child into the public imagination. From there, the work didn't slow down, and neither did the family's superstitions. Inside the family, the dark water warning didn't live as a cute superstition. It sat in the room like a deadline no one wanted to name. Fame came early. Staying intact inside it took the real skill. Hollywood loved child stars and quietly punished them for growing up. Natalie learned early that you weren't allowed to be awkward on the way to becoming beautiful. You either made the transition cleanly or you disappeared. That pressure shaped her, on screen and off. She was coached, refined, watched. The studio era didn't just hire children, it trained them. And a girl like Natalie, already surrounded by ambition at home, became unusually controlled in public. She could perform innocence, longing, confidence, sometimes in the same scene, because she'd been practicing versions of herself since she was small. It's part of why the later success mattered. She didn't just work. She survived the most unforgiving phase of a Hollywood life. Her mother's ambition didn't stop there. Maria managed her career with an iron grip, moving her from audition to audition, set to set. The fortune teller's prediction about fame already felt confirmed, which only made the warning feel louder. Maria kept it alive in the house, repeating it until it settled into the way Natalie moved through the world. From early childhood, she was taught to fear dark water as a real threat, not a story. In 1949, when she was 10 years old, fate seemed to arrive early. She was filming a movie called The Green Promise, playing a young girl in a rural drama. One scene required her to cross a rickety wooden bridge during a rainstorm. The bridge was rigged to collapse on cue, controlled, timed, meant to drop her into water below. But the moment slipped out of control. A lever was triggered too soon. The bridge gave way early and she went down before anyone was ready. The set moved on the way sets often do. Adults reset marks. Schedules kept breathing down everyone's neck. And a 10-year-old learned a lesson without anyone needing to say it out loud. Real fear can happen on cue, and the world can still expect you to keep performing through it. The wrist never truly disappeared from her life. It healed imperfectly, leaving a bump she'd spend years hiding with bracelets and long sleeves. But the deeper mark was what it did to her relationship with water. After that day, the warning at home stopped sounding like superstition and started sounding like confirmation. Water stopped being a backdrop. It became a danger she could feel coming. She didn't grow up as a swimmer. She avoided open water whenever she could, and the fear followed her into adulthood the way certain childhood memories do. Quiet until the moment you're too close, then suddenly loud. The accident on the Green Promise didn't just frighten her, it locked something in place. The fear wasn't abstract anymore. It had happened once, and once was enough to make the second time feel inevitable. Under her mother's relentless management, her career didn't just survive, it expanded. She moved from child roles into more demanding parts with a smoothness that most young actors never pull off. In 1955, at 16, she starred opposite James Dean in Rebel Without a Cause, playing Judy, a teenager pulled between parental pressure and her own hunger for love and identity. The performance earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress and changed how the industry saw her. Overnight, the image shifted from former child star to credible dramatic lead. The 1960s belonged to her. She starred in Splendour in the Grass in 1961, playing a young woman unraveling under the weight of repressed desire and social expectation. The role earned her a second Oscar nomination, this time for Best Actress. That same year, she played Maria in West Side Story, one of the biggest cultural phenomena of the decade. Her singing was dubbed, but her presence was undeniable. She followed that with Love with the Proper Stranger in 1963, which brought her a third Oscar nomination. 3 nominations in less than a decade. By her mid-20s, Natalie Wood was ranked, alongside Elizabeth Taylor and Marilyn Monroe, as one of Hollywood's most bankable stars. She had conquered the nearly impossible, the transition from child actor to leading lady. Most child stars faded or crashed. Natalie thrived. She was petite, with expressive brown eyes and a quiet intensity that translated beautifully on screen. Directors loved working with her because she understood the camera in a way that couldn't be taught, only felt. Co-stars described her as generous and professional, someone who took the work seriously without making it oppressive. But the success came with costs. She worked constantly, often at the expense of any semblance of a normal childhood or adolescence. And beneath the glamorous surface, her fear of water remained. It was a private terror, something she rarely discussed publicly. But it was always there, a dark current running beneath everything else. In 1957, at the age of 19, Natalie married Robert Wagner. He was 8 years older, rising star with clean-cut looks and a charming screen presence. Natalie had harbored a crush on him since her early teens, and when they finally met at a studio luncheon, the attraction was immediate. They married that December, and the tabloids ate it up. They were Hollywood's golden couple. Beautiful, successful, young. But being a golden couple meant living under a microscope. Every appearance became a headline. Every rough patch became gossip, and privacy stopped being a given. She learned to smile through it, part instinct, part training, while the real relationship had to survive inside a public story she didn't control. But the marriage struggled almost from the start. Natalie's career was exploding, while Wagner's remained steady but unremarkable. There were rumors of infidelity on both sides. By 1962, they divorced. Natalie was heartbroken. She threw herself back into work, taking roles that allowed her to channel the emotional wreckage into something productive. In 1969, she married Richard Gregson, a British producer. The marriage seemed like a fresh start. In 1970, Natalie gave birth to her first daughter, Natasha, and for a while, she stepped back from Hollywood to focus on motherhood. But that marriage didn't last either. By 1972, Gregson was gone, and Natalie found herself alone again. And then, in an unexpected turn, she reconnected with Robert Wagner. They had stayed in touch over the years, circling each other with the kind of unfinished business that never quite resolves. This time, they decided to try again. In 1972, nearly a decade after their divorce, Natalie and Wagner remarried. The second marriage was different. They were older, more grounded. Natalie had Natasha, and in 1974, she and Wagner had a daughter together, Courtney. Wagner also had a daughter, Katie, from a previous relationship, and Natalie helped raise her. The family settled into a comfortable rhythm in Beverly Hills. Natalie continued to take occasional film roles, but she prioritized her children. Wagner's career picked up with television success, including the series Heart to Heart. He also indulged his passion for sailing. He bought a motor yacht just under 60 feet and named it Splendour, a name that carried an eerie echo of her most famous work. The yacht became his favorite escape, and surprisingly, Natalie went along with it. She didn't love the water, but she tolerated it for his sake. Friends noted the irony. Here was a woman who had spent her entire life fearing dark water, now spending weekends on a yacht with her husband. By the late 1970s, their life looked stable. The turbulence of their first marriage seemed behind them. They entertained friends, raised their children, and appeared, by all outward accounts, to be happy. In 1981, Natalie returned to film work after years of focusing on family. She signed on to star in Brainstorm, a science fiction thriller opposite Christopher Walken, a young actor gaining recognition for intense, unpredictable performances. The production was intense, and Natalie and Walken developed a friendly rapport on set. Over Thanksgiving weekend, Natalie decided to take a short holiday. She invited Walken to join her and Wagner on the Splendour for a trip to Catalina Island, about 20 miles off the Los Angeles coast. The plan was simple: moor near two harbors, relax, eat, drink, enjoy the ocean air. The yacht's captain, Dennis Davern, would handle the boat. It was supposed to be a break from the pressures of filming. Trips like this ran on a simple illusion that the ocean makes everything quieter. In reality, a boat compresses people into close quarters where moods carry and small tensions echo. Add alcohol, add fatigue, add nightfall, and what felt like a harmless getaway can start to feel tight, like there's nowhere to step away. Brainstorm mattered to her for a simple reason. It meant she was moving again. By then, she wasn't hunting for fame. She already knew what it felt like, and she was choosing work because she wanted to. She was choosing the shape of her work again, stepping back into a career on her own terms, with a family life that now came first. That's why the weekend on the Splendour reads, in hindsight, like a pause at exactly the wrong moment. Not an ending, a breath. Friends around her saw a woman balancing the roles she wanted, actress, wife, mother, without the frantic hunger of early fame. If the trip had gone like every other trip, it would have been forgettable. That's the cruel part. It was ordinary until it wasn't. On Friday, November 27, 1981, the four of them, Natalie, Wagner, Walken, and Davern, set sail. They reached Catalina without incident and spent Saturday exploring the island. That evening, they went ashore for dinner at Doug's Harbor Reef, a restaurant in Two Harbors. They ordered food and alcohol, lots of alcohol. Wine flowed freely, and by the time the meal ended, all four were visibly intoxicated. The restaurant manager grew concerned. Their behavior was loud, their coordination poor. He made a phone call to the local harbor master, alerting him that a group of drunk celebrities would soon be heading back to their boat. It was a precautionary measure, nothing more. But in hindsight, it was a warning no one heeded. Around 10 o'clock, they returned to the Splendour. The night was cool and the harbor was dark, the kind of darkness where water and sky feel like the same surface. And the Pacific in late November is cold enough to drain strength fast, especially for someone impaired by alcohol and medication, turning a bad fall into a crisis very quickly. What happened next depends on who's telling the story. According to later accounts, an argument broke out in the yacht's main cabin shortly after they returned. Wagner and Walken began debating something. Accounts vary, but it seems to have centered on Natalie's career. Walken made a comment about Natalie prioritizing her art, and Wagner took offense. The discussion escalated. Wagner, drunk and angry, grabbed a wine bottle and smashed it against a table, shattering glass across the cabin. The outburst stunned everyone. Walken, uncomfortable, withdrew, either to a guest cabin or outside to the deck, depending on which version you believe. Natalie, upset by the confrontation, announced she was going to bed and walked down to the master stateroom below deck. Wagner followed her. The argument continued, but now it was between husband and wife, behind closed doors. A couple on a sailboat moored about 50 feet away later reported hearing raised voices coming from the Splendour around 11 o'clock. The man and woman were shouting. It was impossible to make out words, but the tone was unmistakable. Anger, frustration, tension. Then, just after 11:05 p.m., something changed. Marilyn Wayne, a woman anchored nearby with her boyfriend and her 11-year-old son, heard a voice crying out from the direction of the Splendour, a woman's voice, panicked and desperate. "Help me! Someone please help me! I'm drowning!" The cries repeated over and over, growing more frantic. Wayne was alarmed. She shouted back, and her boyfriend turned on their deck light. They also heard a male voice respond from somewhere in the darkness, slurred and irritated, saying something like, "All right, we're coming to get you." The woman's cries continued for approximately 15 minutes. Wayne checked her watch, a digital display that read 11:05 p.m. when the screaming started. By 11:25 p.m., the voice had stopped. Silence settled back over the harbor. Wayne tried to call the harbor patrol but couldn't reach anyone. She didn't know, in that moment, that the voice belonged to Natalie Wood. She wouldn't learn that until the next morning when the news broke. Back on the Splendour, Robert Wagner eventually realized she was no longer in their cabin. Almost immediately, something else didn't sit right either. The yacht's inflatable dinghy was gone. Earlier, it had been secured behind them. Now the stern was empty, and the water around the boat was just black silence. Wagner's explanation was simple. He assumed she'd taken the dinghy ashore to cool off after the argument. But the idea landed wrong for people who knew her fear of open water. After drinking, after going to bed, in a nightgown, choosing that moment to climb into a small inflatable in the dark didn't sound like her. It sounded like a detail that raised more questions than it answered. Captain Dennis Davern said he wanted the searchlight on and help called right away. But the night didn't shift into emergency mode. It drifted into hesitation. So they waited and waited. Around 1:30 a.m., a radio call went out to shore, but the Coast Guard wasn't contacted until later, about 3:26 to 3:30 a.m., the moment when the situation stopped being missing on a boat and became what it always should have been, a rescue. By dawn, the search widened. Not long after, the dinghy was found, adrift in an isolated area, not where it should have been. Reports described it as not underway, the kind of discovery that reads less like a deliberate midnight trip and more like a situation that stopped mid-motion. And then, after sunrise, the water gave up what it had been holding. She was spotted floating face down, still in a flannel nightgown, blue socks, and the red down jacket, not right beside the yacht. Down current, separated from the boat, separated from any version of the night that felt clean. Dr. Thomas Noguchi, the Los Angeles County coroner, performed the autopsy on November 30th. The findings were blunt. She had drowned. Her blood alcohol content was reported at 0.14%, a level consistent with significant intoxication. Medication was also noted, substances that, mixed with alcohol, can blur coordination, slow reaction time, and deepen disorientation. But it was the bruising that kept the case from feeling clean. Her body showed multiple contusions, bruises on her arms and legs, a notable bruise on her left knee, and abrasions on her face. Noguchi's view was that these injuries could fit a chaotic struggle in and around the water, a fall, impacts against surfaces, and the frantic violence of someone trying to pull themselves up in the dark while impaired and cold. Noguchi's official conclusion was accidental drowning. The working theory was simple. Sometime after the argument, she went outside, possibly to deal with the dinghy, possibly to get air, possibly to create distance. In that version, she slipped and went into the water. Once she was in, the situation would have escalated fast. Cold water steals strength. Heavy clothing turns into weight. Panic burns oxygen. In the weeks that followed, the case was treated as closed. The sheriff's department accepted the accidental ruling. Wagner, Walken, and Davern were interviewed. Wagner acknowledged the argument and later admitted smashing a wine bottle in anger, but maintained he didn't know how she ended up in the water. Walken said he was asleep below deck during the critical period. Davern supported the general account. Hollywood mourned. The funeral came and went, the industry did what it always does, and the machinery moved on to the next headline. But the story didn't settle. Because even if you accept the accident theory, the night still leaves behind a hard question. What exactly happened in the gap between the shouting and the silence, between a woman being on the boat and a woman being in the water? For years, the official account stayed in place. A tragic night, an accidental drowning, a file that went quiet. Then the silence broke. In 2011, Dennis DeVerne, the Splendour's captain, began publicly walking back parts of what had been said in 1981. He described a night with sharper edges than the original narrative suggested. More tension on board, more volatility after the argument, and a different posture once she was discovered missing. DeVerne said he wanted to respond immediately with lights and calls for help. He claimed Robert Wagner resisted that urgency. He also said the delay stayed with him, years later, as the detail he couldn't unsee. Natalie Wood kept pressure on the case from another direction. She didn't argue from gossip. She argued from character and pattern, a lifelong fear of open water, the oddness of the circumstances, and the window of time between disappearance and full-scale response. For her, the question wasn't just how her sister ended up in the ocean. It was why the night moved so slowly after she was gone. Those claims brought law enforcement back to a case that had already been sealed by public acceptance. The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department reopened the investigation in November 2011, revisited witnesses, and re-examined timelines that had been treated as settled. In 2012, the coroner's office amended the death certificate. The cause of death shifted from accidental drowning to drowning and other undetermined factors. That change mattered because it acknowledged uncertainty in an official way. The circumstances of how she entered the water were not clearly established. The investigation stayed in the public conversation for years. By 2018, authorities described Wagner as a person of interest, while also saying they still lacked definitive proof of foul play. No charges followed, and by 2022, authorities said they had exhausted leads. They stated publicly that Wagner was not a suspect and that they had not developed definitive evidence of foul play. The file remained open, yet the path to a final conclusion narrowed to almost nothing, which left the public with the worst kind of ending: an official record that admits uncertainty, a private world that holds competing certainties, and no answer that lands with finality. Only a handful of people were on the Splendour during the hours that matter. The problem is simple and permanent. The night cannot be replayed. It can only be argued. Records can be amended, statements can be compared, timelines can be rebuilt down to the minute. None of that restores the missing piece, the exact chain of events that carried her from the boat into the sea. The one person who could close the gap never returned to tell it. Her family lives inside that gap in different ways. Her daughters have defended Wagner and said they believe the death was an accident. They've asked for their mother to be remembered for her work rather than the last hours of her life. Natalie Wood has kept the questions in public view, insisting that the fear of open water and the unanswered details cannot be treated as background noise. That split has helped the case linger, but it isn't the only reason. Even stripped of rumor, the story still feels unfinished. A celebrated actress disappears in the dark near Catalina. A search takes time to become what it should have been. Then the ocean returns the body and keeps the rest. What remains, in the end, is the life behind the mystery. A child actor who made the transition that Hollywood so often denies. A leading lady with genuine range, able to play yearning, control, tenderness, and fury without losing the audience. 3 Oscar nominations before 30, performances that still carry weight because they were built on craft, not hype. Yet the ending keeps reaching back through the decades. The films endure, and the questions endure with them. And the water, silent, indifferent, keeps the part of the story everyone wants most.